Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, I am so happy you're here, truly. And I'm really excited for this podcast today. This podcast has been a long time coming. And I want to start with an apology because those of you who've been longtime listeners of the show, you know that I typically drop a podcast on the first and third weekend of every month. And you may have noticed there was no podcast last week. And there was a podcast, but I ended up pulling it right at the last minute. And the reason being is we are going to be talking all about the basics of fat loss, not just in this episode, but in the following episodes. This is going to be a multi-part series. And I spent hours mulling over how to best address this topic because many of you have asked me to speak to it. And I know that a lot of women have questions around how to approach fat loss in a healthy and sustainable way. And this is a topic I take incredibly seriously because it is being sold and packaged in so many irresponsible ways and causing a tremendous amount of unnecessary psychological and even physiological distress in women. So I recorded a podcast that was 2 parts. My audio engineer worked his magic and edited it. And then my amazing project manager uploaded the content into iTunes and created social media images for marketing. And then I listened and, well, I wanted more time with it because I knew I could do better. So I granted myself permission to pull it just as my team was completing their end of the work. And anyway, all this to say, this was originally going to be 2 parts. It is now 4. And technically, I think it's even 5 because I think this conversation began with episode 217. If you have not listened to episode 217, titled Real Talk About Weight Loss, I think it's a great place to begin. You can go back and listen to that maybe after this episode if you've missed it. But it's really the gateway to this conversation. So I'm being very delicate in how I approach the topic of fat loss. Because for a decade of my life, I was a fat loss coach. It was my full-time job to help women all over the globe improve their total body composition. And what I learned in that time is that changing body composition is really not enough. In some cases, even necessary to create a state of deep health. So today, while I absolutely do still help some clients shed fat and change body composition, what I am far more interested in as a coach is making sure that my clients like who they are, what they do, and why they do the things that they do. And if fat loss is a part of that, awesome. We do that work. But fat loss is just as often not the focus of the work that I do with my clients to improve their overall health. It really depends on the woman. It's nuanced, right? It really depends on the woman and where she is in her life and where she wants to focus. I am a very client-centered coach, which means it's really important to me that my client is always driving the car. She's always taking the lead. We go where she's ready to put her focus. So I want to start by saying a couple things, just making a few things really clear. I am adamantly against pursuing physical health at the expense of mental health. And I see this a lot in our culture. I lived in that space personally for a lot of time. I have worked a lot of women through that space, and it's not remotely what I'm interested in. I want women to preserve mental health at all costs. Health is a very big conversation. And what one woman needs to focus on to improve her overall health is not, of course, the same as the next woman. So again, this fat loss conversation is not relevant to all people. It's not always the right time to be having this conversation. And I think, when we think of how big the health conversation is, right? Health is very multidimensional. I talk about this a lot on the podcast, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it today. But there is physical health, mental health, emotional health, relationship health. There's so many layers to health. And each layer influences the other layers. And one of the ways that I have come to think about this, and this was actually offered to me by a mentor of mine, Ido Portal, when he talks about movement. Movement also is a very big conversation. And he talked once about movement being this cloud. And people enter the cloud from all kinds of different places. One person might come in as a yogi. One person might come in through strength training. Another person might come in through soccer. Somebody else might come in through the dance door or through martial arts. But once you're in the cloud of movement, you start to see how multifaceted and expansive it really is. And that's how I love to think about health. You may initially be focusing on changing your body composition. You might be initially focusing on improving your cholesterol or getting better sleep at night. But my high hope is by entering the cloud of the health conversation at all, you start to realize how much more is available to you and how much each thing influences the next. The other thing I want to mention is that I think where women are ready to focus along the health journey is really determined by their level of feeling safe. And the fat loss conversation can feel very unsafe for a lot of women because of their history, because of prior experiences. And so I just really want to honor that and tell you that if you are someone that this conversation makes very uncomfortable, I completely see you. And I think that's a really important thing for you to honor and work yourself gently through. So again, focusing on fat loss is appropriate for some women, not all women. And fat loss is by no means definitive of health. It simply addresses physical health, which is one dimension. It is one doorway into the health arena. It is not by no means the only doorway. So even if fat loss is something that you genuinely want to put time and energy into, it is not always the right time to focus on fat loss. And it really largely depends on what else is currently happening in your life. If you are going through a major crisis, if you are going through a divorce, making a big career change, moving across country, you have to take into consideration your total stress load. Right? Because fat loss, the process of fat loss, can be stressful on the human body and the human psyche. And if your body is not in a position to handle more stress, you're really asking for trouble. So here's how this conversation is going to roll. We're going to break this into 4 parts. Today, I'm going to spend some time clearing up some misunderstandings around fat loss, so you can move from a really mentally healthy space into the conversation. In week 2, I'm going to talk about the importance of healing and fortifying your body, specifically your hormonal health, your gut health, your muscle health, in order to rebalance your chemistry, your overall chemistry, and really be in a position where your body can actually handle more stress. Because what a lot of women are doing is they're starting already really stressed out, and then they're dumping more stress on their body to try to elicit a response, and it doesn't work like that. So we're going to talk about healing and fortifying in week 2. In week 3, we're going to talk about stressing the body without distressing the body. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the energy in, energy out equation. When you hit a plateau, what kinds of things can we move through? What kinds of things can we try on? And then in week 4, we're going to just tie up some loose ends. And I'm going to answer some really commonly asked questions on this subject. Please hear this. 4 parts is not enough. I mean, somebody could start an entire podcast on fat loss and have years of content. I have no interest in doing that because there's so many other things I want to be talking about. But this is just an overview of the basics. All right. So let's start by addressing some misunderstandings. First of all, fat gets a bad rap. It really does. It makes me think of stress. Stress also gets a bad rap. Stress is actually a beautiful thing. It's how we grow. It's how we transform. It's how we learn. But too much stress can, of course, be a bad thing. It can break us down. And the same is true of fat. Fat is a wonderful thing. Your body uses it in so many glorious ways. There is an upside to fat. And if we carry too much of it, it can lead to problems. So let's focus on this upside for a second, because I think it helps you to maybe stop judging fat so harshly. Because I don't hear a lot of people talking about fat in a positive way. Fat is your body's way of storing energy, cushioning joints, regulating hormones. It keeps you warm. It is such a big part of brain health. I mean, I think 70% of your brain is fat. It's a big part of reproductive health. You store energy in your fat cells, and you can also use the energy of fat cells. So I like to think of fat as being very supportive to my body. It's my body's way of fighting for me and protecting me. We need fat. We just don't need too much of it or too little of it, because that's where things get a little bit problematic or a lot problematic. Fat tissue itself is not the problem. But too much fat tissue can absolutely be a symptom of a problem. The second thing I want to address, and I addressed this very heavily in episode 217. So again, if you didn't listen to it, go back and check that episode out. Weight loss is not the same as fat loss. I made a very strong case for this in that episode 217, which is why I keep bringing it up. Weight loss is really a decrease in your overall body weight. And you don't really know when you're talking about weight loss what exactly you're losing. Are you losing fat? Are you losing muscle? Regardless, you're probably losing some water, because water is a big part of both of those tissues, but you don't really know which one you're losing. And that can be a big problem, which I think you'll understand more by the end of this episode today. So when we talk about weight loss, we are mostly focusing on the scale, which really just tells you your relationship to gravity. It tells you nothing about the state of your overall health. It is possible to lose a tremendous amount of weight, to be a thin individual and still be metabolically obese, which simply means that you carry a very high percentage of body fat in comparison to muscle mass. Just because you shed a bunch of weight does not mean you're healthy. Now, fat loss focuses on maintaining as much muscle on the body, building the muscle, fortifying it, protecting it fiercely, and shedding fat mass. Now, anytime you shed fat mass, you're running a risk of losing muscle. But if your muscle is well cared for and protected, you're minimizing the chance of that happening. So when we talk about fat loss, We know the scale is not going to tell us if we're losing fat or muscle, but a body composition test will. And body composition refers to the portion of fat you have relative to the amount of lean tissue you have. And lean tissue is muscle, of course. It's also bones, water, organs, that type of thing. So anything that's not fat. If you only focus on losing weight, you may end up losing a tremendous amount of muscle mass. And I actually see this happen all the time. And then what happens is when a person does not have a lot of muscle mass, they're still at risk for a lot of metabolic challenges because of the high percentage of body fat that they carry. So by differentiating between muscle and fat, body composition helps you to remove the guesswork of determining what your weight fluctuations even mean. Is it muscle? Is it fat? There's no guessing. A body composition test will actually tell you. So when we talk about a healthy body fat percentage, what are we talking about? Well, there are outlying numbers because I will say that your body fat does change. What a healthy percentage is does change depending on your sex and depending on your age. But we're just going to say ballpark, 14% to 30%. If you're over the age of like 55, higher than 30%, a little bit higher is, kind of still within a somewhat safe range. But really keeping your body fat somewhere between 14 and 30% is going to help reduce your risk of things like organ failure, poor circulation, heart disease, stress fractures, strokes, cancers, decreased sexual function, reproductive health, things of that nature. Now, I want to kind of make a note here about body mass index. How is it in the year 2020, we are still using body mass index as a measurement of health? It blows my mind. So body mass index is something that a lot of you probably have had measured before. A lot of Western medicine clinics are still using it to determine the health of somebody's body. Is one of the measurements of the health of someone's body. It's a method that is really used to assess the health of an individual by comparing the amount of weight they carry to their height. So it's really based on height and weight. And the problem with that is the same problem we have with using the scale. The scale doesn't tell us what that mass is made up of, nor does a body mass index test. Or a body mass index number, right? So a single number like body mass index really oversimplifies our health risks and ignores important factors that contribute to good health. So when you're trying to improve your health, hopefully you are focusing on losing fat and gaining and protecting muscle. And scales and body mass index cannot tell you that. The third misconception I want to clear up here is that not all fat is created equal. Where you carry your fat matters. So that fat that you hate on your hips or on the back of your arms is not nearly as dangerous to your metabolic health as the fat that you carry deep inside of your torso. So the majority of the fat on our body is subcutaneous fat. It's the fat that you can squeeze or pinch on your arms, belly, thighs, butt. And you may have even had the experience of like a fitness professional using calipers to measure your subcutaneous fat. It's really the superficial layer of fat on our body. It's the fat that we see. And a certain amount of subcutaneous fat is normal and super healthy. We have another type of fat called visceral fat. Visceral fat is known as belly fat. It's the white fat that is stored in your abdomen around your organs, like the liver, the pancreas, the intestines, the heart. And high visceral fat levels are more dangerous than high levels of subcutaneous fat. So visceral fat is really strongly linked to metabolic disease and insulin resistance, and an increase in your risk of death, premature death. And of course, even for people who have a normal body mass index or normal weight. Because again, those numbers tell us nothing about what's happening inside the body. So subcutaneous fat doesn't carry the same risks. And some subcutaneous fat we would even think is very protective, right? Because there's that cushioning. So fat is very nuanced. It really depends on where we're carrying it and how much of it we're carrying. Why is it important to your physical health to know how much fat you carry and where you carry it? So you can avoid all the things that I mentioned earlier, right? I talked about when you have a higher percentage of fat, it really predisposes you to a lot of metabolic challenges, like the heart disease and the strokes and reproductive health challenges, organ failure, all of these things. So let's move on here. I will talk, by the way, in the 4th episode of this series, I will talk a little bit more about specific body fat testing. I'm not going to get into it today, but we can talk about some of the different types of body fat testing because I know this is a question that comes up very frequently. The 4th misconception that I want to speak to, and this is really important, all of these are important, but this is kind of a meaty one. Less calories is not always the smartest place to start. And this is kind of what the diet culture has trained into us, right? Well, if you want to lose weight, just eat less. And women are usually so desperate to lose weight, this seems like a really sensible place to start. But here's the problem with this. Most women are already in a place of distress, both mentally and physically. I don't have women come to work with me who aren't really highly stressed out. Right? They're usually coming to me because they're experiencing symptoms of that really high level of stress. And the best starting place is to ensure that you focus on healing before further stressing the body. So less food and more exercise, right? Calories in, calories out, that whole equation. It can be very distressful on a body that is already experiencing really high levels of stress. So healing, to me, looks like fortifying gut health, fortifying immune health, which of course most of your immune system lives in your gut. It looks like rebalancing hormones. It looks like building, fortifying muscle tissue. Really working on your mental health to make sure you're moving from a mentally healthy space. And if all of those things are in place, here's what I know. Number 1, you will probably start shedding excess fat. And number 2, if you start to hit a plateau, there are lots of ways to further challenge the body, like creating a deficit in the calories, like increasing exercise, but I don't think that is the wisest place to start. I have seen starting there cause so much unnecessary challenge. So I talk women through what I call a fat loss triad. And it has 3 parts. And these are listed in order of what I think is most important. So number 1, the first part of the fat loss triad is mental health. That is, if I haven't made that clear by now, the most important thing. The second to that would be healing and fortifying the system. That's hormonal balance, repairing the gut, making sure our chemistry is working the way it's supposed to, optimizing organ function, things like the liver and the thyroid. Because if your organs aren't working properly, I don't care what you're doing with your food and exercise, your body's not going to understand that messaging. And then the third part of the triad is the energy in, energy out equation. But I put that last very intentionally. So the other part of this is, well, I'll say this. I mentioned the second part of the triad is the healing and fortifying. And a big part of that is focusing on building and protecting muscle. We are such a fat phobic culture. I feel like women hyper focus on weight loss, which I've already spoken to why I think that's so problematic. But then even if they're more evolved and start thinking about fat loss, we can get really hyper focused on fat loss to the point that we're not really focused on building muscle tissue. And muscle is the powerhouse. Like, we want it because it allows us to burn more energy at rest. It makes fat loss so much easier without having to go into a deficit. But even if you go into a deficit, you will lose weight more easily with really healthy muscle. Muscle helps to elevate metabolic function. And I just want to remind you that all metabolic function is the efficiency at which your cells do their jobs. Your cells have a tremendous amount of work to do. They build, they transport, they detox, they produce energy, so many things. And so when I say that muscle helps to boost metabolic function, I mean it helps to make all of that cellular work more efficient. We produce energy at a higher rate. We detox more easily. We build and transport things more easily. That's all a beautiful thing. Gabrielle Lyon, who is a muscle-centric physician, she's a rock star. If you don't know her, you can look her up on Instagram, but she is definitely one to know. But she talks about muscle as the organ of longevity. I love that so much. Muscle is the organ of longevity. If you want to age gracefully, if you want to be able to continue to do all the things that you love to do, muscle is essential. It is the foundation of your metabolism. It helps you to regulate blood sugar and blood lipids. It's an endocrine organ that helps you to regulate the metabolism of all of your tissues. And I love what Gabrielle Lyon says. She argues this point a lot. She says, we're not over fat. We're under-muscled. So muscle building is a big part of healing. And in order to heal muscle, we have to use it and we have to feed it, which means we need to eat enough food. We also need to make sure that we're eating food that is really promoting the repair and growth of muscle tissue, which is protein, right? We can't just be eating carbs all the time. Although I'm not saying carbs, I'm not villainizing carbs in any way, but we definitely need protein. And I have to say that pretty much every woman I have ever worked with is low in the protein department. And then if she's not utilizing her muscle, on top of that, why would muscle stay on the body? It's a very expensive tissue to keep. So if you're not feeding it and you're not using it, your body will get rid of it before it gets rid of fat. And that leaves you incredibly metabolically disadvantaged. I also want to point out here Stacy Sims, who I interviewed in episode 99 of this show. Stacy Sims is an exercise physiologist, a nutrition scientist. She's just a total rock star. And she wrote the book Roar, which I strongly recommend you check out. And in the book, she talks about the fact that women start to lose muscle about 3% per decade between the ages of 30 and 80. So essentially what our bodies are doing each decade is they're catabolic. They're more prone to catabolism, not cannibalism, catabolism, which is where we break down tissue. In this case, we're breaking down muscle tissue. We're not naturally building it up. Also, women during perimenopause and menopause, we start to have hormonal shifts, namely estrogen and progesterone start to leave the party. And that also promotes muscle breakdown. So we are not hormonally in a really muscle producing advantage as we age. And so we can change that. We can get ourselves that advantage if we feed ourselves well. We create, well-balanced plates. We're feeding the muscle what it needs, protein, and we're utilizing it often and much. So fat loss and muscle building are not really the same processes. Muscle is not going to be a byproduct of fat loss, but fat loss absolutely will be a byproduct of building and protecting muscle tissue. All this to say that if you focus more on healing and recovering and fortifying that muscle, rather than just focusing on fat loss, you will enjoy the journey and the journey will go so much better for you because fat loss will be a byproduct of that process. So the last thing I want to mention here is that leanness has a price. And I think that, again, because of our cultural messaging, and it's kind of shoved down our throats, through social media, through advertisements, magazines, billboards, you name it, like that you are going to be a happier, better human the leaner you are. And I just want to call BS on that because it's not true. There is a cost to leanness that we are not talking enough about. So when I talk about that range of like 14% to 30% body fat being the healthy range, you may think, well, oh wow, wouldn't it be great to be 14% body fat? No, it would not. It would basically be like a full-time job, right? Being so meticulous about every bite of food that you put in your mouth, working out in such a way that is so dialed in that you are maintaining that level of leanness, which obviously some people maintain that level of leanness more naturally than others. But there is a price to pay for leanness in terms of the other areas of health that are equally important. So if it is costing us our mental health, our health in relationships, our ability to sleep, to produce energy and power, at what point do you draw the line? And it's different for every woman. But I will tell you that at my leanest weight, which was probably, I think I was about 34. Well, it was probably right before I had my son. So I was in my early 30s. And I was 14% body fat. And I was not a happy kid at all. I had no energy. I couldn't lift heavy. I was super reactive. It was literally a full-time job for me to organize my life in a way that allowed me that level of leanness. And ultimately, of course, it was kind of divine timing because when I had a child, it really, sort of reminded me that there's so many other facets of my life that are more important to me than my level of leanness. So where I am willing to recalibrate my focus is personal to me. But I have seen so many women chase a level of leanness, get there and realize it wasn't worth the cost. So I just want to throw that out there. And I brought this up in episode 217, but I'll bring it back here. Yanni Friedhoff is an obesity researcher that I followed for a long time. And he has this quote that I use it all the time because it's so beautiful. He says, "A person's best weight is whatever weight they reach when they live the healthiest life they can actually enjoy." And again, health being such a big conversation, it's not just exclusive to your level of leanness. So I hope that feels like it was a good intro to this conversation. We've kind of laid a foundation and we have hopefully sorted through a few commonly misunderstood things. And the next episode, I will be talking about the second part of the fat loss triad, which is that healing and fortifying process and the things that we want to do to help promote that process, or the things that we could be doing. Maybe you don't want to be doing them, but things you could be doing. And then we will just continue the conversation from there. So again, hope this was helpful. If it is, let me know by dropping me a comment. Definitely leave me a review on iTunes if that is a convenient thing for you to do. I can't tell you how much I appreciate people leaving reviews. You're welcome to come into the free Women of Grace and Grit Facebook community and let me know there. And you're always welcome to email me at Courtney@graceandgrit.com. That's it, my friends. I hope it is a good start. I hope it is helpful. Maybe you learned something or were reminded of something. And we will continue in the next episode. I hope I'll see you there. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story. And it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort. And with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.